Once upon a time, there was a peasant called Hiri who lived happily alone. He had his own land, his own food and his own company. And if he got lonely, he sang himself a song. Life was hard, but he did not starve and he was happy. Until one day, a rich man who lived in a manor house nearby came and knocked on his door. "Kiri Glibovich," said the rich man, smiling like a jewel. "The time has come to pay your family debt." Kiri did not understand. "What family debt? Neither my father nor my mother ever mentioned such a thing." The rich man let out a noise of surprise. "But Hiri, how can it be? For the story of your family's debt has passed down through my house for generations." "What shame," he said, shaking his head. "Not only did your forefather shirk his duty of payment, but your father shirked his duty of telling you of it." "My forefathers were good men," said Hiri. "Now, if you don't mind, my goat needs to be fed." He tried to close the door, but the rich man caught it with his foot. Suddenly, his eyebrows lowered, and his eyes shone darkly. "Kiri Glibovich," he said coolly, "I must remind you that you are in my debt." Hiri saw now that there were some men behind the rich man, holding large bats. They were thick men who had grown on milk and meat every day. Hiri let go of the door. He did not even know this man's name. "You see, your forefather, 7 generations ago, stole an apple from my tree. Now, my forefather was a generous man, so he made an offer, if the thief worked in his fields for 3 weeks. Then he would forget anything had ever happened. The man refused, and so my forefather made a different offer. The thief could be in debt to him. This was a very expensive apple, the kind that is used to make the finest wine. I should add. Your forefather agreed. And so the debt has been passed down from generation to generation, collecting interest every year. I must admit, I am quite surprised you had not heard of it. I thought your family's huge debt would be common news in the area around here." Of course, the rich man did not tell him the truth, that Hiri's ancestor had been starving, that the master of the manor house had offered him an apple, and then asked for payment afterwards, and that, when he had proposed the debt to him, the poor farmer had said, "Write down whatever you like, but I will never pay for that apple." Hiri gulped, as if he could taste the apple on his tongue. "How much interest has collected?" he said quietly. The rich man casually said the number and Hiri felt his stomach tighten. Like a starving man who has just found his goat killed. "Naturally, I am not a cruel man," said the master of the manor house. "I will make the same offer to you as my forefather did to yours. You may come and work off the debt, based on the interest that will be 3 years of work." Hiri's heart sank. But what could he do? He had not a single coin to pay the man with. And if he died without paying the debt, it might go to the other people in the village. He sighed. "I agree to your deal." "Good." The rich man clicked his fingers. The master's men came in and quickly carried Hiri out of the building. He didn't even have time to say goodbye to his goat before he was carried to the manor house. For the next 3 years, Hiri worked hard, never shirking his duty or showing up late to work. He made the rich man a lot of money. And when the 3 years were coming to their end, the rich man thought, I can't lose this man. Unlike the other peasants, he works like his life depends on it. And I suppose it does. How can I keep him here longer? The next day, the master came to Hiri and said, Hiri Glibovich, I have a new task for you. Take these hares and graze them for me, so that they go fat and delicious. But if you lose them, you will be in serious trouble. Hiri was tired from his years of work, so all he could do was nod and take the hares. But when he took them to the field to graze, the hares ran away, disappearing like water pouring through his hands. Oh no, he cried. I have lost the master's hares. I'm sure he chose those hares because he knew they would run away. And he'll want to keep me working here longer. Arg, I would rather starve. Just then, an old man came wandering through the field, carrying a pack on his back. He was blind, so Hiri said hello to him. And the old man asked him why he sounded so sad. When Hiri explained his situation, the old man took a beautiful instrument out of his pack. This is a magic lira, he explained. Play it and see what happens. So the peasant sat on a rock and tried to play the instrument. He had never held a musical instrument before, and it took him a long time to figure it out. He almost gave up, but when he finally produced a sound, it was beautiful. Like a stream running through a clear valley. And the hares immediately ran back to him. Oh, thank you, cried Hiri. But the old man was gone. When the peasant returned to the manor, the master counted up his hares and was shocked to find all 10 of them there. The next day, he sent Hiri out again, but asked his wife to go after him. Wear a disguise and find out how he is keeping those hares so close. So the wife dressed herself up in common clothes. Usually, she wore fine silks and heavy makeup. So just by wearing normal clothes, she looked like a completely different person. She found Hiri sitting on a rock, singing to himself. Peasant, she said, and then remembered that she was disguised as a common woman. I mean, young man. What are you doing here? I am grazing my hares, he replied, looking at her strangely. Well? Where are they? So Hiri pulled out his lira and played it. And all the hares came running to him. They danced around his feet, and he stroked one of their heads. Impressive, said the woman. For a handsome young man like you. Handsome? Thank you. Hiri tried to return to his playing. But the woman said, I would like to buy one. Sorry. They're not for sale. I'll pay 100 rubles, she said, pulling a bag of gold out of her pocket. Hiri looked at her for a while, as if he was considering it, and then said, No. I won't sell to you. Please, I'll pay anything, she said, taking his arm. It was much thicker than she expected, not with fat, but with muscle. Hiri sighed. Well, I suppose I might sell one of them. But only to someone who kissed me. And that's on top of the 100 rubles. Done, said the woman, and before he could realize what was happening, she had grabbed his cheeks and kissed him. Then she dropped the bag of money on the ground, picked up a hair and ran away. Miss, wait, cried Hiri. Don't hold the hair so tight. You'll strangle him. So she held the hair gently. It sat calmly in her arms. Until suddenly, just when she was reaching the manor house, it jumped out of her hands and ran away. What she didn't know was that Hiri had waited and played his music to call the hair back to him. The wife explained to her husband what had happened, although she didn't mention the kiss. And the next day he sent her out again, this time disguised as a man. She wore a mustache made of goat's hair, but it looked ridiculous. And she tried to do a low, strong voice and ended up coughing. My price is the same as yesterday, miss, said Hiri, clearly seeing it was her. If you want to take my hair away from his grazing, you'll have to feed me a kiss. And 100 rubles, of course. So once again, the woman kissed him. And this time they kissed for quite a while. Although the goat's hair mustache made it very uncomfortable, Hiri warned her about holding the hair too tight, because they were such easy creatures to strangle. And once again he called the hair back with his magic lira when she was halfway home. The woman wasn't thinking very clearly about what she was doing. So far, it was just a lot of fun. And she thought her stupid husband would keep sending her out, day after day, to buy hairs from the peasant. But she underestimated his love of money and cheap workers. So the next day, the master himself went to the field, disguised as a woman. His disguise was even worse than his wife's. But Hiri acted as if he were a charming young lady. They are such beautiful animals, aren't they? Said Hiri, picking up a hare and showing its long, soft ears. My master gave them to me to graze, and I have been looking after them so carefully. Yes, yes, said the master. How wonderful. I would like to own one myself. Now, how much do I have to pay you to buy one? The price is 100 rubles. But there's something you must do first before I will sell to you. I ask it of everyone, you see. Every time. And what is that, young man? Oh, I don't think you'd be interested. You're too pretty to be interested in a poor peasant like me. The master smiled sweetly. Absolutely not. You're so handsome. All right, then, said Hiri, smiling. You have to kiss me. The master froze as he realized what the man was saying. He made a strangled noise and jumped so high in the air that his ridiculous disguise fell off. Then he ran back to the manor house shouting, Wife! Wife! What have you been up to? Hiri laughed until his sides were sore, and then he said, Come on, my hares. We're not needed here anymore. It was the last day of Hiri's contract, and he was free to go. His debt had been paid, interest and all. So he took the 200 rubles he had won from the master's wife and went traveling. In every town he went to, the people thought he was just another poor, uneducated peasant, but when he played his lira and the hares came to dance around him, they all clapped and gave him money. Soon, his name spread through the land. And people saw him coming and cried, "Look, it's the rabbit man." When the hares realized this, they were not happy. And they bit anyone who called them rabbits and not hares. But the rabbit man sounded better than the hare man. So people continued to make the mistake. And soon half of Ukraine had felt the angry bites of Hiri's hares.
In olden times, when the Lord himself still used to walk about on this earth amongst men, it once happened that he was tired and overtaken by the darkness before he could reach an inn. Now, there stood on the road before him 2 houses facing each other, the one large and beautiful, the other small and poor. The large one belonged to a rich man, and the small one to a poor man. Then the Lord thought, "I shall be no burden to the rich man. I will stay the night with him." When the rich man heard someone knocking at his door, he opened the window and asked the stranger what he wanted. The Lord answered, "I only ask for a night's lodging." Then the rich man looked at the traveler from head to foot, and as the Lord was wearing common clothes, and did not look like one who had much money in his pocket, he shook his head, and said, "No, I cannot take you in. My rooms are full of herbs and seeds. And if I were to lodge everyone who knocked at my door, I might very soon go begging myself. Go somewhere else for a lodging." And with this he shut down the window and left the Lord standing there. So the Lord turned his back on the rich man and went across to the small house and knocked. He had hardly done so when the poor man opened the little door and bade the traveler come in. "Pass the night with me. It is already dark," said he. "You cannot go any further tonight." This pleased the Lord, and he went in. The poor man's wife shook hands with him and welcomed him, and said he was to make himself at home and put up with what they had got. They had not much to offer him, but what they had they would give him with all their hearts. Then she put the potatoes on the fire, and while they were boiling, she milked the goat, that they might have a little milk with them. When the cloth was laid, the Lord sat down with the man and his wife, and he enjoyed their coarse food, for there were happy faces at the table. When they had had supper and it was bedtime, the woman called her husband apart and said, "Hark you, dear husband, let us make up a bed of straw for ourselves tonight, and then the poor traveler can sleep in our bed and have a good rest. For he has been walking the whole day through, and that makes one weary." "With all my heart," he answered, "I will go and offer it to him." And he went to the stranger and invited him, if he had no objection, to sleep in their bed and rest his limbs properly. But the Lord was unwilling to take their bed from the 2 old folks. However, they would not be satisfied, until at length he did it and lay down in their bed, while they themselves lay on some straw on the ground. Next morning they got up before daybreak, and made as good a breakfast as they could for the guest. When the sun shone in through the little window, and the Lord had got up, he again ate with them, and then prepared to set out on his journey. But as he was standing at the door, he turned round and said, "As you are so kind and good, you may wish 3 things for yourselves, and I will grant them." Then the man said, "What else should I wish for but eternal happiness, and that we two, as long as we live, may be healthy and have every day our daily bread. For the third wish, I do not know what to have." And the Lord said to him, "Will you wish for a new house instead of this old one?" "Oh, yes," said the man. "If I can have that, too, I should like it very much." And the Lord fulfilled his wish, and changed their old house into a new one, again gave them his blessing, and went on. The sun was high when the rich man got up and leaned out of his window and saw, on the opposite side of the way, a new clean-looking house with red tiles and bright windows where the old hut used to be. He was very much astonished, and called his wife and said to her, "Tell me, what can have happened? Last night there was a miserable little hut standing there, and today there is a beautiful new house. Run over and see how that has come to pass." So his wife went and asked the poor man, and he said to her, "Yesterday evening a traveler came here and asked for a night's lodging, and this morning when he took leave of us he granted us 3 wishes: eternal happiness, health during this life, and our daily bread as well, and besides this, a beautiful new house instead of our old hut." When the rich man's wife heard this, she ran back in haste and told her husband how it had happened. The man said, "I could tear myself to pieces if I had but known that. That traveler came to our house too, and wanted to sleep here, and I sent him away." "Quick," said his wife, "get on your horse. You can still catch the man up, and then you must ask to have 3 wishes granted to you." The rich man followed the good counsel and galloped away on his horse, and soon came up with the Lord. He spoke to him softly and pleasantly, and begged him not to take it amiss that he had not let him in directly. He was looking for the front door key, and in the meantime the stranger had gone away. If he returned the same way, he must come and stay with him. "Yes," said the Lord, "if I ever come back again, I will do so." Then the rich man asked if might not wish for 3 things too, as his neighbor had done. "Yes," said the Lord, "he might, but it would not be to his advantage, and he had better not wish for anything." But the rich man thought that he could easily ask for something which would add to his happiness, if he only knew that it would be granted. So the Lord said to him, "Ride home, then, and 3 wishes which you shall form shall be fulfilled." The rich man had now gained what he wanted, so he rode home, and began to consider what he should wish for. As he was thus thinking, he let the bridle fall, and the horse began to caper about, so that he was continually disturbed in his meditations, and could not collect his thoughts at all. He patted its neck, and said gently, "Lisa," but the horse only began new tricks. Then at last he was angry, and cried quite impatiently, "I wish your neck was broken." Directly he had said the words, down the horse fell on the ground, and there it lay dead and never moved again. And thus was his first wish fulfilled. As he was miserly by nature, he did not like to leave the harness lying there. So he cut it off, and put it on his back, and now he had to go on foot. "I have still 2 wishes left," said he, and comforted himself with that thought. And now as he was walking slowly through the sand, and the sun was burning hot at noonday, he grew quite hot-tempered and angry. The saddle hurt his back, and he had not yet any idea what to wish for. "If I were to wish for all the riches and treasures in the world," said he to himself, "I should still to think of all kinds of other things later on. I know that beforehand. But I will manage so that there is nothing at all left me to wish for afterwards." Then he sighed and said, "Ah, if I were but that Bavarian peasant, who likewise had 3 wishes granted to him, and knew quite well what to do, and in the first place wished for a great deal of beer, and in the second for as much beer as he was able to drink, and in the third for a barrel of beer into the bargain. Many a time he thought he had found it, but then it seemed to him to be, after all, too little. Then it came into his mind what an easy life his wife had, for she stayed at home in a cool room and enjoyed herself. This really did vex him, and before he was aware, he said, "I just wish she was sitting there on this saddle and could not get off it, instead of my having to drag it along on my back." And as the last word was spoken, the saddle disappeared from his back, and he saw that his second wish had been fulfilled. Then he really did feel warm. He began to run and wanted to be quite alone in his own room at home, to think of something really large for his last wish. But when he arrived there and opened the parlor door, he saw his wife sitting in the middle of the room on the saddle, crying and complaining, and quite unable to get off it. So he said, "Do bear it, and I will wish for all the riches on earth for thee. Only stay where thou art." She, however, called him a fool, and said, "What good will all the riches on earth do me, if I am to sit on this saddle? Thou hast wished me on it, so thou must help me off." So whether he would or not, he was forced to let his third wish be that she should be quit of the saddle and able to get off it, and immediately the wish was fulfilled. So he got nothing by it but vexation, trouble, abuse, and the loss of his horse. But the poor people lived happily, quietly, and piously until their happy death.